The NDK Automatic Rhythmer, also known as the Whippany Rhythm Master RM-10. Has some pretty cool sounds, nice patterns. Now, this one has been modded by me, so let's give a listen to what those do. It's not really modded, I just exposed the trimmers because they do some nice things to the sounds, and you might want to hear what they do. Now that one affects the kick. Right? Gives it a nice long decay. Now some of these trimmers work better on other patterns, so the change is not as obvious as in the case here. I believe this is the conga. Let's try this wood block, or I guess it's a clavation. There you go, you get a much more intense sound that goes from wood to metallic. The cymbals also have a dramatic change. You can basically cut them all the way out. And then it lets you focus on tuning some of the other sounds. The rumba. The cymbal still gives some noise, so you can take it out when the pattern's not using it. There you go, now you can hear that conga kick in. Now this is the foxtrot with just really low cymbal, which kind of doubles as the snare, I'll say. It's a very sensitive break between off and on there, or quieter and louder. All depends on what you want it to sound like. Now, one thing you can do with this drum machine is multiple patterns. You can actually hold two down at once. There you go. Rock Mambo. Very sensitive. I wonder if the range that they chose for this is just not the best. That's a nice sound. There you go. So it's a very versatile machine. Having those controls on the back makes it much more versatile. Multiple pattern selection is cool. That is from 1975, so it doesn't have some of those modern features you might want. But people do MIDI mod this, which is quite interesting. Probably some other things you could do to it if you really wanted to change the sounds that it makes, but I think it sounds pretty darn good just the way it is. Time for a tour of the NDK Automatic Rhythmer. This is a drum machine from 1975. There's the inspection date on it. They say it's okay. This goes by many names. I found that the Whippany Rhythm Master RM-10 is the same machine. The Eco Rhythm Box, the Side Kicker. The only difference that I found in them has been that on some models, the tempo potentiometer here also has a push button feature, and the push button activates the start-stop of the drum machine. On this model, there's a foot switch port on the back. So when you have it's actually this one. When the foot switch is installed, if you close the switch, it shorts everything so there's no sound. You open the switch and the drum machine starts. So you need a locking switch, not a momentary switch, if you want to try to make a foot switch for this. So onto the tour. So we have all the pattern and control buttons here, and then there's this matrix of copper traces and all the different combinations of signals that get put together when you push the different buttons. Now, the timing circuit is actually there's the bottom board, the timing and patterns. This is assembled. I'm not going to take it apart anymore, but I'll tell you that in this upper corner here, there's a transistor that is part of that timing circuit, and I know because when I put an oscilloscope on it to see what it was doing, it slowed down the tempo. So if you have timing problems, that transistor could be part of the problem, or capacitors around it, because we know that those are involved in timing circuits. Now, the main work that I did on this, well, I'll mention one thing. There's a diode down here on this bottom board, and you can see there's a capacitor attached to one leg of it, on the input side of it actually. That's crucial. The way this was assembled is this capacitor was simply attached to the screw post. So if you took the top board off to work on it, that capacitor was no longer grounded. If that capacitor is not grounded, the drum machine doesn't work. So I've changed that and permanently grounded it with a separate wire rather than just attaching it to the screw. So if you take it apart, you can continue to work on it. Now, a couple odd things I noticed. One was I have an extra wire. This was just wrapped around wires internally. It is soldered to something, doesn't do anything. I've just left it. Now, the more important thing is all of these connections for the percussion signals, right, the timing signals for the individual drum sounds. All of this wiring was basically done wrong. All the wires were soldered on top of the board. Every single one. Actually, all of them. Everything. The power lines, the ground lines, audio outlines. Everything was soldered on top of the board. These are through-hole circuit boards. The copper traces are in the bottom. You stick the wire through the hole and solder on the other side of the board. You don't just lay the wires on top and solder them down. It's just not as sturdy an arrangement. So, back to the tour. Transformer provides 18 volts AC. There's a half-wave rectifier. Actually, it's those two diodes there and some big capacitors on the bottom. Change it to DC. Coming into this upper board, you get 3.5 volts. It's nice and steady. Looks great. That's what you want for your voice circuit, which is what all of this is on the upper board. These are the voice circuits. Back to power for a moment. I got some warnings here because I shocked myself a couple times on this, being careless and stupid. Turns out that this light is an actual light. It's not an LED. It's a it's like a regular old bulb in there, and it's got 50 volts AC on the back of it. And the back of the on-off switch, this is not just a volume. Hear that click? So it has two leads on it, and those leads have 120 volts on them. So there's no shroud or anything protecting you from touching those. So I've added this little cardboard shroud so you won't get shocked. Now, what did I do? So I traced the audio signal path, and you can see in my blog, it's a very simple audio amplifier for the audio output. So I traced it back, and this transistor here was bad. So I originally had no output at all in this. So I replaced this transistor. I got output. I didn't have good output, but I got output. I could hear the timing signals. And once I reattached this capacitor to ground, then I started hearing 2/3 or so, 3/4 of what the drum machine was supposed to sound like. Not all the sounds were correct. Thought I have a little piece of plastic there. So there's all kinds of little interesting things in here. A couple capacitors mated together there, and things that have been cut out of the circuit board and reattached to the wiring so they weren't desoldered from the board. They were just cut and then attached to the wiring. So back to what I did. Got output going once this audio transistor, this amp, was basically changed. I also changed the capacitor in its output line. That didn't have any effect on anything, frankly, but I thought that maybe it would affect some noise that I was getting. Turns out all the noise was coming from over here, in the cymbal circuit. I handled that another way, which I'll describe in a moment. But first, I'm going to tell you about the mods. So you can see there used to be 1K trimmers on this circuit board. And there was another one over here, actually, right here was a 100K trimmer for the cymbals. I've removed all the trimmers, mounted them to a separate circuit board. Actually, these are all new trimmers. And rewired it. This thing here on the bottom, this ganglia, that's actually a ground bus because the trimmers were grounded. 2 leads of them were grounded. Only one of the leads actually mattered. And so that's why there's only one wire for each trimmer going to its original 3-hole locations. Now, and then this board is, of course, has one ground, and all these other trimmer spots were already grounded by virtue of them all being attached, well, to ground, but also to the same big copper trace on the other side of the board. So that was so that you can adjust any of the sounds easily. The sounds are great, and they get really crazy when you start playing with the trimmers. During this process, I continued to have noise. I got the noise out by testing some different capacitor values off of one of the leads in here. And I ended up with 2 capacitors in parallel, so their values add together. I think it's about 1.5 or about 1500, I'm going to say, yeah, 1500 picofarad. Reduced the noise coming out of the cymbal circuit without really changing anything else of that circuit. So I was happy with that, and I was able to just mount them on my little board there. Replace some other capacitors in this circuit, these 3 here. When I was testing the cymbals, trying to figure out why they weren't playing right, I was using a wet finger testing the back of this board, looking for interesting points that changed the sounds. And this cluster of transistors was one of those points. When I touched it, the cymbals would come on, basically. So my body was altering the circuit, and I could tell there were some other, it didn't last, right? I would touch it, cymbals would come on, take my finger away, they would go away. So I replaced all these, and the cymbals work properly now. So, is there anything else that would be useful for others working on such and such a board? Power, timing, some of the wiring issues, we talked about all that. I think that's it. Now we should give a listen.